you had some trouble with Phineas. He was all over the place, but we mentioned the zeal of Phineas, and that's an archetypical moment from the book of Numbers, that Phineas eliminated pollution from the camp in the wilderness. Phineas was a descendant of Aaron, second generation descendant of Aaron, and the book of Numbers says, and the priesthood was accorded to his and his heirs because of his antagonism to marrying non-Jews and bringing outsiders into the camp as such. He was allotted to the priesthood in perpetuity. And I'm not saying this is a pleasant episode. No one says it is. But this was one of the archetypical episodes for the Zealot movement, the zeal of Phineas. So there were people named Phineas at the last time, at the time of the fall of the temple, called a stonecutter, who was elected by the Zealots, which is really symbolic, as the new high priest in place of all the high priests, the corrupt high priests whom they killed. And that's an important point to realize, and there's so much that can be emphasized from a careful reading of Josephus, that I told you should often group groups together by who their enemies were. Like enemies normally were related groups in some way. And I disagree with Christian. I'm not against Christianity insofar as it doesn't build itself on a denigration of another people. That is, to me, the only acts between us on that. I mean, and I don't think, as a fair, objective observer, you think it's proper to build yourself on a denigration of another people. And unfortunately, to some extent, that has penetrated into some of the documents. I hope not all, but some. Letter of James, it isn't there, for obvious reasons. But the letters of Paul, yeah, for sure, it runs all through them. Acts, it runs all through it, unfortunately. And it's something we've all had to bear, because this is the dominant culture in the Western world, and it has many beautiful parts to it, no doubt about it. The ideal is something really stirring, extremely attractive. And you all know that. That's why most of you are Christian and claim identity with that ideal. You're attracted by its beauty. Yes, it's some of the highest ideals of Hellenistic civilization incorporated into that persona. From Socrates on down to this Greco-Roman Pax Romanum period. So, of course, that character is, in its mythological sense, we have to discuss its historical sense, is a tremendously winning personality. And as Paul says, I run the race to win, not beating the air. But I think since we've seen the deleterious results of that presentation to some extent, any really good Christian, caring Christian say, always he adds, I am a Christian carpenter, or something like that. This is a Christian repairman, and so on and so forth, meaning that he's better than others who may not be, etc., because he's not going to cheat you or be honest. Well, if you're really a Christian and honest and not going to so-called cheat anybody, etc., you have to be aware of what has happened with that undercurrent in the materials. And I tell my Christian scholarly friends, you have to do something about it. And none of them are willing to do anything about it. None of them are willing to do anything about it. Because they're afraid the whole edifice will come down. But I don't believe that's true. I think if you that's the beauty of the Jamesian thing. It offers a way of escape from that pernicious part of the heritage that has caused so much pain, suffering, and ultimately Holocaust. You don't want 6 million people on your consciences. Say, I had nothing to do with that. No, maybe you didn't actually chuck people into the gas chambers and and fires and watch a million babies burn and stuff like that. But something worked those people up into it, and absolutely unimaginable frenzy of hatred. And so if the documents that are being circulated have that aspect to them in any part, that has to be excised. Someone has to have the courage to excise that. And I think that I've always said the Messiah himself, if we can discover who he is and so on, and we can pin him down, he would, as I've repeated, expect you to do it. He would not want that on his conscience. The man that we have portrayed here would not accept that. Would not accept that. I'm sure, but I'm preaching now. I'm sure, but I go into any church and I would preach this way. I am sure he would not accept it. Constantine would accept it, Eusebius would accept it, Paul would accept it, but I don't consider any of those people good Christians. That's my apology. Forgive me, I don't mean to hurt your feelings with that. It's tough. I don't have the answer. And you guys are going to live longer than me. It's for you to try to answer. None of us are strong enough to answer that question, but at least you can talk about it with your friends and your associates. That's the best I'm sure you can do. You're not Martin Luther after all, and he was no perfect person, that's for sure. Yeah.
Would you expand on why Paul was not a good Christian?
I didn't say he wasn't a good Christian as such. The Christianity he defines makes him a good Christian, but I'm saying that, I forget how I put it, but I think I've said enough about Paul. I don't understand, but I just did say that he wasn't going to do anything about it. I don't know. How wasn't a good Christian? He wasn't Christ-like in the sense he has all these prejudices and limitations and temper tantrums and animosities and, he's a very intemperate man with, we have him revealed in his letters. He's extremely unchristian. That's all I can say. He doesn't control his emotions. He isn't full of goodwill. He doesn't have charity. Where's the Christianity? He doesn't love his enemies. He doesn't turn the other cheek. So, I don't say anything Christian about him, okay? I'll just leave it at that. I don't know. I think James is a perfect Christian. But now you have to decide that. Eisenman, you like James, so that's why you say he's a perfect Christian. Yeah, I want a righteous person. A person who doesn't suffer from prejudice and gut level antagonism and stuff like that. Who's not trying to do one-upsmanship and win points and get up on the other person. Anyway, you'd have to read Paul's letters from that perspective, not the all perspective, and I do that in the Christian Origins path, and I'm sure Ron DeBay has done that to some extent also. Never mind. So I'll get back to Jesus here. I don't think what I'm saying is offensive to anybody that we would call Jesus in the slightest. And I wish he were standing right here so he could tell you. I wish we could have him materialize. And I'm sure he would tell you, yeah, that is absolutely right. I don't want those things said and done in my name. I don't want to be responsible for holocausts, even in the partial sense or even in just a 10th degree sense. I don't want, that's not mine. I do not know you. He would reject that. So I'm not saying that anyone can do about it. I'm just saying that you can, life is short, and all you can do, none of us are Martin Luther's, who was a very defective person, he too, but he did achieve some great things, obviously. To expect any of us to have an effect is almost impossible. But the more people become aware of it, the more the groundswell will be to do something about it, to make Christianity what it ought to be. And I mean to say that I see Christianity as a great product of Greco-Hellenistic world civilization. Christianity as we have it is the flowering to some extent of that civilization. I know it's built on a Jewish messianic root, but it incorporates very little of the Jewish messianic root except the idea of messianism itself. So the Jamesian form is, of course, much more than that. So there's nothing wrong with any religion. I don't see anything wrong with Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism. I don't think paganism is necessarily wrong for pagans. I was in South India, and there's so much paganism you see there. It's astonishing, but it's also very moving and attractive. So I think American Native religion was an impressive one, and so on. So not the ones where they're sacrificing people down the steps in the pyramids that Mel Gibson is going to make his next horrendous movie about. He loves gore and blood, total fascination with it, which is why I won't go to see his movies. But the Plains Indians and so on. Although my wife always tells me, I don't believe that stuff about Central America. That would be propaganda trying to make the people there look bad. And I can't judge. I wasn't there. Seemed to be some of that cruelty there, obviously. So, yeah, I think all religions are good because they help people get through a difficult world and where we only have a limited lifespan. Insofar as they don't create hatred against other peoples, and insofar as they're not built on a seed that makes you automatically dislike someone else who isn't a member of your group. So other than that, I mean, they're all helpful in helping people get through what is a difficult thing, life itself. Anyway, that's the positive. Any more questions about the exam? Phineas, we just did. What are the short answers? I don't think that the other short answers were a problem. The essays didn't seem to be a problem. Any questions about the exam? All right, now I told you to get me to stop gabbing. And I said I wanted to do that section on declaring all foods pure. You guys are quicker than me. Can you find it quicker than I can find it where it is? Because I'm going to have to skip around and do the...
Are you looking at Acts?
No, I'm looking in the Gospels, where he said this, declaring all foods pure, where he's talking about the toilet bowl and what comes in out of the mouth going down the toilet bowl. Come on, you're faster than me. I'll look in the Gospels, you look in the Harmony. And I should have it marked here someplace. See who finds it first. Come on, Matthew, I'll find you. Should be around the 16, 17. Let's see. Earlier than that. God, you guys make me do all the work. I'm just a teacher. You're supposed to be the workman. Here it is. I think I found it. Matthew 15. Okay, let's find Matthew 15 in our harmonies here. Yeah, this is it. This is the baby. Okay. So let's look at this. Let's see what, I always like to look at what comes first, before that. Oh, before that is Peter sinking into the Sea of Galilee. And in chapter 14, and of course Herod's birthday party that we have at the beginning of chapter. It's always interesting to see it's so interesting. Each thing leads into a new thing. This is so well constructed, some of these passages and materials. Then notice, for instance, in chapter 14, after Herod's birthday party and the killing of John the Baptist, Jesus' disciples come to him, 14, 15, 16, 17, and then you get the miracle of the loaves and the fishes. It's also about food. We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And he said, bring them to me, this is Matthew. And after commanding the multitude to rest on the grass, by the way, this is out in the wilderness. They've gone across the Sea of Galilee and they've gone out into the wilderness. So it's one of those wilderness signs episodes that Josephus is all complaining about. Took them out to show them the signs of their impending freedom or redemption, okay? And so it's he blessed them and broke them. The disciples gave them to the multitude. Many of you realize the multitude is the rabbim, the masses in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And all ate and were satisfied, and they took up 12 baskets full of the pieces that were left over. Now here our writers love all these numbers and actually really do beguile your mind with all these numbers. And immediately Jesus made the disciples get into a ship, and he sent the multitudes away, and then he went up to the mountain, sort of like Moses. And then they saw him walking on the sea, and there was a storm, and Peter comes out, and he wants to walk, and there was a violent wind, and of course Peter gets the backhand of things as usual. Why does Peter always get the backhand of things? Because the writers here know that Peter was a lukewarm Paulinist. And this is where, and you say, how do you see through that? How can you see that? Well, it may not be there. Maybe I'm just thinking. You have to judge. That's my take. And you can say, oh, you're reading too much into this. Yes, you're perfectly within your rights to say that, absolutely. That's you to determine for yourself. I'm just challenging you, making you think about this. You know, most people just read this, and yes, and then Peter walked on the waters and tried to walk, and Jesus said he sank, and Jesus said, oh, you have so little faith, and then they just go on. They don't think anything about it. They just let it, they just absorb it. But I don't look at it like that. I see a lot of this as polemics, one party arguing with another party. And here, of course, the point is that Peter is weak in Pauline faith, because it's Paul who has a doctrine that your faith saves you, not your works. And it's James, if you know the other letters, who attacks the man, the foolish, empty man, James 2, who, I can read it to you, and I've done it before, but I'll do it again. And most people take this, now we don't know if it's an authentic Jamesian letter, and people argue with that, but most agree it's in the school of James. And it starts in chapter 2. First it talks about the poor, clearly the Ebionites. God chose the poor, line 5, rich in faith, heirs to the kingdom, promised to those who love him. Loving God is piety, the piety commandment, piety towards God. And the next one is the righteousness commandment, loving your fellow man. Do not blaspheme, etc. But you should keep the royal law of Scripture, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the righteousness commandment. John taught, Josephus says, piety towards God and righteousness towards your fellow men. Well, there it is right here, right bango in the letter of James. It's hard to find it, but it's there. And then you look in the scrolls, you'll find it over and over again in all the scroll documents. You look at, I already did it, Josephus' definition of Essenes, their purity duties and other things are listed under piety towards God, and the other duties are listed under righteousness towards your fellow man. So you have it here too in the letter of James. But you see, if you are showing any partiality towards any persons, you are already lawbreakers. Law breaking is in the scrolls. For whoever keeps the whole point but stumble on one small point, he is guilty of all. So James is implying that you even more extreme, and the scrolls are like that too. Small, and later Jesus is portrayed, or earlier Jesus is portrayed. Not one jot or tittle shall disappear from the law until all these things are accomplished. Jesus says that in several environments in the Gospels. But if you kill, commit murder, you are lawbreakers. For judgment without mercy, who's him who doesn't do mercy. My brothers, what good is it if someone says he has faith but does not have works? There's the famous passage, 14. Can faith save him? Here's the person who claims to be saved by faith, and we know who advocated that position, so this is normally taken as an attack on Paul. Now, whether you agree it is an attack on Paul, is your decision to make here. Even so, faith, if it does not have works, is dead. Faith without works is dead. We've heard that 100 times. That is the James position as outlawed and outlaid in the letter of James. There's no anti-Semitism. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works and I will show you my faith from my works. It's a nice rejoinder. This is polemics here. You believe God is one? Well, the demons do too. Oh, you empty man. Oh, you foolish man. In my book, I show you that in the Habakkuk Pesher, there is an attack on the spouter of lying, whose works are of emptiness. Rik in Hebrew, emptiness. And that to me is a parallel here. Anyway, oh, you foolish man is sometimes translated, oh, you empty man, 20, this is a famous, don't you know that faith apart from works is dead? And then he gives a very weak example, I think, about how Abraham was justified by works. That's also in the letter MMT, where the recipient of the letter, I go into that in my book, read my book, you'll get all these things. The recipient of the letter called MMT, Miksat Maseh Torah, some works of the Torah, that's what the translation is. That's a works, Torah, works-oriented letter. Evokes that material about and Abraham's faith was counted for him as righteousness, the same one that Paul evokes from Genesis 15:6 in his letters. But that person speaks about Abraham's works counting for him as righteousness. In any case, here James also quotes that, was not our father declared just by works when he offered his son Isaac? So the only work he can think of for Abraham is the willingness to sacrifice Isaac when Abraham was tested, if you know the whole passage there. That's a pretty weak argument. Now, but this is polemics. Doesn't mean that it's a great, doesn't mean James is, or the person responsible for writing the letter of James is a great polemicist or arguer. Maybe Paul's better. He is. Paul's a master. He's a master polemicist, master rhetorician. Can weave spells. You know, so could a lot of other people I would like to, I could cite, which I wouldn't, because you would get angry at me, who could weave rhetorical spells around people's minds. That doesn't mean he's right. Great lawyers weave spells, and they're often totally wrong, and so on. So just because a guy is expert at a skill, and that's Paul's upper class training. He's upper class. He's a Roman citizen. He has the virtue of a high education for that time. He's been educated clearly by excellent Greek rhetoricians. He's not a fisherman, if we can take these people at their word. In any case, he's not a common day laborer. He's not, just a Palestinian hick. And that's why I say he's from the Herodian family. And if you want to learn about that, I've got an article about it in several places. I cover it in James, the brother of Jesus. I cover it at length in the new book, why I explained Paul was Herodian. The best proof of Paul's Herodian origins is someone pointed out to me even in one of these classes about 15 years ago, the salutations at the end of Romans, which are considered authentic, where Paul sends greetings to his kinsman Herodian, which means in Greek, the littlest Herod. And he calls that person his kinsman, preceded by the household of Aristobulus in Rome. Now, Aristobulus is an Herodian. May not be that Aristobulus, but the point is it precedes the littlest Herod, and he was Salome's second husband after Philip passed away. She married Aristobulus, who was the son, I think, of Herod of Chalcis, he was called. If you look at the genealogy, who was the brother of Agrippa I. Now, I know these mean nothing to you until you start studying the genealogies. But the point is, that was her husband. And they're portrayed on Roman coins. You can see a picture of Salome and Aristobulus on their own coins, but in Roman style with their portraits together. And and the logo above them is "Great lovers of Caesar." I believe they were. Maybe literally, maybe only figuratively. I don't know. Not Caesar, the original Caesar, but the present Caesar would be Caligula or Tiberius or Claudius, depending on what the date of those coins are. But, proclaiming yourself a great lover of Caesar tells you where they're coming from on their coinage. So that's right, and their son was called Herod. They had a son called Herod. That, to my mind, is the littlest Herod. And Paul is sending grace, and Paul is sending greetings to these people. They're living in Rome on a pension. Paul is sending greetings to these. They've retired there. Paul is sending greetings to them as his kinsmen. So that to me is, there's more proof than that, but that to me is one of the key proofs. And it also explains his Roman citizenship. How does Paul get a Roman citizenship? Oh, and Acts says, I bought that. The Roman soldier questions him. But no, all Herodian family members had Roman citizenship, which Augustus had bestowed on the descendants of their father's father, Antipater, in perpetuity for services rendered to Rome. He got his Roman citizenship. They're all Roman citizens. How about Paul's nephew, if you know the book of Acts, who sneaks into the Roman citadel? Paul's nephew is unnamed. I give you, and Ron gives you the names of Paul's, Saul in the Herodian genealogies, who has a sister in Jerusalem, whose son, if I can remember his name, became temple treasurer. I can't remember now offhand his name. Do you remember the one who's the son of this sister of Saulus in the genealogies? Julius Archelaus, I think his name is Julius Archelaus. I think that's his name. He goes to Rome, and Josephus compliments him as one of the readers of his works. Josephus likes him a lot. He'd been temple treasurer. To my mind, that's the nephew of Paul who has entree into upper-class Roman circles, because, you know, Acts is very reticent, doesn't name Paul's nephew, who can go in and warn the Roman guards that the Jewish extremists are want to kill Paul on the trip down from, like in Iraq today, on the trip down from Jerusalem to Caesarea, where he's going to stay in whose palace? Agrippa II's palace. So he's going to say, well, he's in the dungeon in Agrippa II's palace? No, I don't think he's in the dungeon. I think he's in a nice living quarters while they figure out what to do with him and to protect him. That would be his kinsmen. Those would all be kinsmen. So again, that doesn't come through the works. It's not a proven point, and don't take it as a proven point. But you must admit it's a stimulating question. You must admit it's worth thinking about, that it makes you think, and if you can counter it with arguments, we don't have time in this class to do that. All power to you. That's great. If you can muster the arguments to beat that one down, that's good. That shows you're on top of this field. So it doesn't hurt you to consider these things and be challenged by them. That's all I want to do. Throw in the new stuff, give you the data, and then you work it. Yeah, what's your question?
Is the buzzword, if we see works, people have, like John with works, is that also Mosaic law?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay.
And that,
so we can use those.
Yeah, in this period. That's why it's very important that you get the right Hebrew for works. Some of these people, like Vermesh, which is why I disagree with his translations, conceals it. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, he puts acts, deeds. Don't be fooled by acts, deeds. Ma'asim is doing, and in James is always do. The word is osei Torah, the doers of the Torah. It's in the Habakkuk commentary. The verbal noun for that is ma'asim, works. Mix up ma'aseh ha-Torah. Some works, ma'aseh is the plural, and it's cut because it's compounded with Torah, so it's not ma'asim, it's ma'aseh Torah, and it's based on oseh, doing. Hebrew works like that. But it's tough for people who don't know the language to understand these intricacies. Yes, anywhere you see works, you can think of it as works of the Torah in this period. Now, other people who don't want to see it like that can see it as they want, but in Palestine, that's how it's seen. Now, if we're talking about service, mission, work in the sense of traveling abroad, all the toil Paul does, and so on and so forth, all he goes through, that's a different Hebrew word. That's avodah. That's avodah, work, in the sense of, that's work in the sense of toil and mission. Mission is avodah, work in the sense of doing works of the law, works, which God recognizes. Those are that's ma'asim. I could write it on the board for you, but I just keep on taking more time out of what we want to get done here. But I guess whatever we do in this class is worth something. So if we don't cover everything, you guys will forgive me. I get carried away, So that's that. This is an ion. And the word is, for instance, if we want osim, doers, or if we want to go osei ha Torah, then this is how it works. Doers of the, that's of the Torah. Now that's another cheap thing that some of the translators do, including my associate, whose name I just mentioned, but I won't want to mention again, he might sue me. I'm waiting for him to do that, in which case I will countersue him for slandering me in the introduction to all his translations of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I don't think he'll do that because he has misinformation and slander about me in the introduction to his scrolls, and he also has done it in other articles, so I think I'm free of that. But I hit back at him very hard in my New Testament book, because I'm fed up with being slandered by people I consider to be dopos. In any case, and giving misinformation. He says, Eisenman says, Paul is the wicked priest in the scrolls. And of course, Paul's no priest, so Eisenman's an idiot. Well, that shows he never read any of my work, because the one thing I do not say is that Paul is the wicked priest. He says that because he thinks the wicked priest is the same as the spouter of lying in the Dead Sea Scrolls. But I make it quite clear that the spouter of lying is an ideological internal enemy within the movement itself, and these are two separate people, and the wicked priest is an external enemy responsible for the death of the righteous teacher, or the destruction of the righteous teacher. I make that clear in all my work. So what he says about me in the introduction to his work, and he has it in all his translations, is not only inaccurate and insulting and slanderous, but it shows he never read any of my works, but he just listens on hearsay. Second and third hand opinion, and that's a guy from Oxford, the great school Oxford. You have to be awed by names, because these people crawl their way up the greasy pole to one of these positions at Harvard or Notre Dame or Oxford. Don't be impressed by these people. Usually those positions are given out by who you know, and the network, and the in people all promote their own. It's sort of like the Republican Party or something like that, you know, since most of you, I assume, are Democrats. Anyway, let's finish this. So I don't think it's a very good argument here, and I say Paul is a master rhetorician. You see, faith was working with works, and faith was made complete by works. And the scripture was fulfilled, as it was said, and Paul quotes this too. No, he doesn't quote this. Yes, he does. And Abraham believed on God and was counted for him as righteousness. That's how Paul constructs his theology on that. So you know this is being aimed at a Paul-type adversary. And he was called friend of God. Friend of God is in the Damascus doctrine. Abraham is a friend of God. Isaac is a friend of God. It's in column 3 of the Damascus doctrine. And he was declared just by works, not by faith only, and so on and so forth. And to drive the point home, so faith apart from works is dead. So that's the Jamesian position. So why am I reading that to you? Now I've lost my other place by doing that. I was in chapter 4. It's difficult. That's why I've got all these little tabs in here. It doesn't help me. You know, go back to Peter falling into the Sea of Galilee for lack of what? Faith. That's the reason I say that that's a Pauline presentation of the situation. Oh, Peter, if you had sufficient faith in Christ, you would have walked on the Sea of Galilee. No, I don't think you would. I don't think anyone's ever walked on the Sea of Galilee, including Christ himself. That's, forgive me, but that's not, you know. This now is Hellenistic mystery religion presentation. That is gods who suddenly appear and disappear like Asclepius or Dionysus. They're able to do these things. Jesus is able to do these things in literary portrait. Now we have to decide if he did it in the historical being. That's our question. And you're, again, the final arbiter of that, aren't you? You have to make that determination. I know it's going to hurt your faith. I apologize for that. I'm not in a church. Your faith is your own affair. And I don't mean to hurt it, but to evaluate these questions will have an effect on faith, you know. That shouldn't have an effect. If faith makes you work righteously, then I think you're okay anyway. I don't think there's a problem. But, you know, even Paul says, when I was a child, I saw things as a child, as through a glass darkly. When I grew up, I put away childish things. And I think I had that as in my James book as one of the quotes that I put in the dedication page there. So I think Paul has something to say about that, which is perhaps useful. In any event, Jesus, you know, we don't know if this is Jesus the God-man walking on the sea, and you'll have to decide that yourself. By the way, then they want to touch him, line 36, the hem of his coat, and as many were touched are perfectly well. I like to pick these things up as we go because I'm not going to be able to cover everything. That's Matthew 36, 14:36. Jerome records a notice about about James, that is not in any other context, that the people of Jerusalem, so holy was James that the people of Jerusalem used to try to touch the hem of his coat as he walked by. They say, so what? Well, I think this is a playoff of that. Any of these things are people trying to touch Jesus and so on, playoff notices of that kind about the person of James. You see, you mean to say James was this and Jesus wasn't? No, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying I know James was this. You know, it doesn't say they tried to cure themselves from touching him. Now that is superstitious Asclepius kind of thing. You say, who? Who's Asclepius? The Greco-Roman god of healing. And in fact, I think his symbol is on all medical things to this day, with that funny snake thing. You know, on medical symbolism, they have a sort of a crook with a snake twirled around it or something. That was the sign of Asclepius, I think. And if you look up Asclepius, you can get information about him. All the healing centers in the Greek world were dedicated to him, and you came to the god and you got healed. And here you're touching the healer god in these episodes. Now look, these are beautiful, attractive things. I'm not against this. Is like why I call it Hellenistic. It's not Palestinian. So why isn't it Palestinian? Because we don't have that in the documents of the Palestinian tradition until here. We don't have miraculous healers, except a few things about Moses that no one really pays much attention to. Moses puts his hand in his shirt and pulls it out and it's leprous, and he puts it back in and it isn't leprous. I think Jews, anyway, just consider those superstitious passages, don't they? Thank God, absolutely was.
Did you say that was Jerome that says that about
Yeah.
people?
I think it's on a commentary on Matthew. I have a reference to it in James. It gives you the actual passage in Jerome. You can find it if you look at it in my index. And I have it in my new book too. That's a very important passage in Jerome. All the touching things go back to that. But it's because James is so holy. Was Jesus so holy that people tried to touch him? Yeah, I would assume so. To my mind, that's how I reconstruct historical Jesus. Jesus James, not Jesus Paul. That's the question. Is this material retrospective overlaid by people who knew Greek myth and had a theology already, or is it historical witness? You know where I stand on that, but you make your judgment too. Forget me. Consider me the prosecution of the defense or something, and you're the prosecutor or the lawyer for the. You're the lawyer for the defense. I'm the prosecutor for the whatever it is, or vice versa. Just think of it as a law court, and we're trying to convince the jury of our positions. All right, anyway, you can evaluate that. Chapter 50, you see, I just like to get the context. Then the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying, now I always take those things as very, very important. And I'm not even looking at, by the way, you look at the parallels in Mark and Luke, okay? So far I think this material is only going to be parallel in Mark. If you see something extra in Mark, call my attention to it, because I can't look at both Bibles at the same time. And I didn't even look at 14, the parallel, sometimes the people put these together and mess them all up with parallels, and it's almost impossible to follow. Like that basket thing, for instance, Matthew 14:21 just goes up to 12 baskets, but Mark really moves on with that. See how Mark moves on with that? Luke basically, adds a few things to Matthew, but look at Mark. I don't think you can tell which gospel came first in these things. Shall we go and buy 200 pennyworth of bread and give them to eat? Mark 6:37. And he said, talk to them, how many loaves have you? Go and see. And when they knew, they had said 5 and 2 fishes. And he commanded them all should sit down by companies upon the green grass. And they sat in ranks by the hundreds and fifties, because you know, they're a revolutionary army, if you like, out there, and he's feeding them in the wilderness, like the people, like the Jewish people in the Exodus. And he took 5 loaves and the 2 fishes and looked up to heaven, and he blessed and brake the loaves, and he gave to the disciples to set before them, and the 2 fishes he divided among them. And they did all eat and were filled. In my new book, I watch the word filled all the time. It's an extremely important word. And I show you how the word floats from tradition to tradition. There are key words that float. And they took up, you'll have to look at my new book and look under filled to see what I mean. And they took up broken pieces, 12 basketfuls, and also fishes, and they ate. The loaves were for 5,000 men. 5,000 is usually the number Josephus gives for Essenes. 5,000 or 4,000 or 5,000. Other versions of this, it's 4,000 people that he's feeding. This is repeated again. This feeding episode, and then it's 4,000. I think it's repeated in chapter 16 of Matthew, and probably chapter 7 of Mark. Let's see, what did I want to... Oh, and so there are also, if you know the pseudo-Clementine recognitions, how many people went down to Jericho when James fled the angry enemy, Paul-type person who threw him down the steps of the temple in the middle of the debates in the early 40s? How many people fled down to Jericho and went out to see the 2 graves that whiten themselves every year in book 1 of the recognitions? Do any of you remember? 5,000. Always 5,000. In Acts, how many were added to the early church, etc., etc., in the early chapters? 5,000. Well, this is, I think, the number of Essenes. This is the number Josephus normally gives for Essenes, 4,000 or 5,000. Anyway, you know, be that as it may. Let's go back to Matthew. You know, so that's what I mean. If you find meaningful extra material in Mark or Luke, call it my attention. Then the scribes and Pharisees came down from Jerusalem. And Mark has, they gathered together unto him the Pharisees and certain of the scribes, some of the scribes. If you look at Galatians, who comes down from Jerusalem to argue with Peter, Barnabas, and Paul? In Galatians 2. That's where you need the Greek. But you can't depend on these crummy translations. The some from James. Some. Watch that terminology, some. In Acts as well, 15, when we are having the triggering of the so-called Jerusalem Council. You have to know this stuff by heart in your brain to get a real grasp of this. Look, I'm not even a Christian. I know it better, I think, than most Christians. You'll have to agree with that. This is how well you have to know it. You have to know it better than everybody else. So you just pull these things out, bam, 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 bam. I'm lucky I teach it every other term or so. So it becomes like, because I write about it, it becomes a rote to me. So I think it's, then some came down from Jerusalem, or some Pharisees came down from Jerusalem. In chapter 15 of Acts, you can look at the language. Watch the word some, or certain ones, some certain ones, the same one, same language in Greek. And taught the brothers that unless you were circumcised, you could not be saved. As if they had never heard that doctrine before. As if it's the Pharisees imposing circumcision on the brothers. And then Paul says, Barnabas and I went up to Jerusalem. We were furious and put the position that we had before the brothers and triggered what the so-called Jerusalem Council all through chapter 15. And Paul says everyone greeted them nicely and warmly. And then James, first Peter speaks and said we're not to trouble the Gentiles with these things. That's how he's portrayed. And then James is portrayed as giving the final rulings. Abstain from blood, which means you're not going to be drinking any communion ceremonies of the blood of Christ. Abstain from blood, even symbolically. You know, James is the chief, the big chief. Pauline communion is out the window. But that doesn't mean it really is out the window. I'm just saying that's the implication. Abstain from blood, fornication, so drinking blood. That's a Greek mystery cult procedure and activity. That you drink the blood of the living and dying God to gain his immortality. You drink Osiris, you drink Orpheus, you drink Dionysus, you drink Mithra. Mithra was full of all this blood stuff. This was important in the Greco-Roman world to have cults of this kind. They're called mystery religions. I'm not a great expert on that. You can do a paper on that if you want. But don't think that the James people, you can't, look, I don't have time to argue with you about it. You just decide and weigh this yourself. You've heard the Orthodox, now you hear the unorthodox. We can't argue it out, we would never get anywhere. You argue it out in your own mind and put your position. But the point of the matter is, just think about that. You can't ban blood and then have a ceremony, even if it's only symbolic, on drinking blood. So the Jerusalem church banned blood, at the very least, because we don't even know if this presentation of the Jerusalem conference, as it's called, is authentic in Acts 15. But even if it isn't, it's pretty damning on some of these issues. Anyway, James rules. I rule, making it easy for Gentiles, not hard. They should abstain from blood, which they don't do, by the way. I mean, I don't even stay from blood, so, I go down to McDonald's and eat juicy hamburgers, and the more blood, dripping out of hamburgers on the beach and barbecue, the better, man. It all smells good, and, that meat was, my mother used to say, oh, that meat was really juicy, Well, not kosher meat isn't juicy, I'll tell you that. They drain all the blood out of it, In any case, abstain from blood, that doesn't mean just killing, it means going near women in menstrual cycles, eating blood, and all that kind of stuff. Things sacrificed to idols, which I've already emphasized. Fornication, which I mentioned a little bit, and the last thing, strangled things. And there the pseudo-Clementine recognitions helps you flesh that out. I already knew what it meant. It means carrying. Because a strangled thing, a beast of prey was seen to strangle the windpipe of its prey. And that's an attempt to translate into Greek from Hebrew, a word which was not so familiar to Greek. Pseudo-Clementines gives the whole thing in several different passages where it says, abstain from, food that has been killed by, beasts of prey, food lying by the wayside, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. And that's just a shortening of carrying. If you look at Ezekiel, instructions to the priests in the new temple, and after he defined to the sons of Zedekiah in chapter 44, he speaks of abstention from carrying. And then finally, the Quran has picked this up. This is the basis of Quranic Muslim dietary law. Jamesian directives is Quranic dietary law. Muslims are instructed to abstain from blood, things immolated to an idol, and carrying. That is, you see these signs, you go up the street here and you see these signs, halal meat. How many have seen that when you go past a Muslim delicatessen? Yeah, that's what that is. Jamesian dietary law. That's what it is. Don't tell a Muslim that. They'll cut your throat. Everything comes from angels for them. There is no history. They don't believe in history. They believe in revelation. Okay, fine. But historically, that's where it comes from. I'm cutting corners here. So let me go on here. We're talking about the sum. I think all of these sums have to do with the sum, and that's the two. They are the party of the circumcision. In Acts, some came down to the brothers in Antioch, triggering the Jerusalem council, saying, unless you are circumcised, you cannot be saved. That's the party of the circumcision. That's Galatians 2, where Paul says, some from James, who were of the party of the circumcision, came down to Antioch, and Peter, who had previously kept table fellowship with Gentiles, and Barnabas withdrew, and no longer were willing to do so, and I assaulted them to their face. I, great Paul, assaulted them to their face and called them hypocrites. And why they continued in this hypocrisy when I knew that they used to do these things, and so on and so forth. And that's the passage I told you that Augustine wrote, the great teacher Jerome. Augustine, a 5th century Christian theologian in North Africa, who had previously been a Manichaean and converted from Manichaeism to Christianity. And Jerome, the great Bible collector who wrote the Bible in Vulgate, in the Latin Vulgate Bible, lived in Bethlehem, but was the great scholar of his time, who had been a friend, am I losing you guys? I hope not, of Rufinus. Who is Rufinus? Well, you'll teach your baby who he is. He hears me, or is it a he or she? Is they determined? They say, he hears me. Listen up, kid. He was the one who found the Pseudo-Clementines and published them. And Jerome called him a snake in the grass. And when he died, they had been friends from the land. Both came from the land. And they'd been friends in Palestine. And when he published these things, obviously Jerome turned totally against him. Jerome is really the creator of Catholicism as we have it today. Jerome is the person who decided that Jesus' brothers were his cousins. And that's the Catholic position that's taught in all churches to this day. Jerome's a clever guy and a sophisticated guy, but he didn't like Rufinus, and I have to think it's because he published these Pseudo-Clementines. He said that snake is finally dead, and he celebrated, that Rufinus died. Okay, so why were we referring to the Pseudo-Clementines? For carrying, of course. Anyway, can't remember, lost my place. But anyway, the some who come down are the party of the circumcision, and therefore, you see, I think here, then come to Jesus, Pharisees and scribes. But Mark has some of the scribes and Pharisees. I think this is, again, a code word for the people, the Jamesian party within the early church. So you see what? These are not Pharisees? Even Acts calls the some who came down Pharisees. Let me, if I can get it to you so I can show you. That's why you have to bring things, you can't just take everything at face value. Well, look, at the average person who's got a job and goes to church on the weekend or something, you can't expect them to sort through these things. That's why you have to be able to sort through these things. Don't be harsh on your patriots. They're not on your level. I'm not trying to be a snob. They don't have the sources at their disposal. They can't marshal all these things. They just take the documents at face value and go. It's fair enough. There's nothing wrong with it. They're trying to live. Here it is, chapter 15. And certain ones who had come down from Judea, 15:1, were teaching the brothers that unless you were circumcised according to the law of Moses, you could not be saved. And then in 5, the same thing, it is repeated. And there were certain, let me see if I can get it right, certain ones of those of the sect of the Pharisees who rose up and said, it's only right to circumcise them and make them keep the law of Moses. That's the trigger to the Jerusalem Council, Acts 15:1 and 5. Well, so there is the basis of the sum here, and the Pharisees and so on, and the connection to the circumcision issue. I know it's hard for you because don't forget in Galatians 2, that's how I do. I marshal all those things to show you the total complex of the data. Anyway, let's go on. So to my view, this is going to be an attack on the James people. We've already had promotion of the Paul people from Peter having insufficient faith. Since Peter is at issue in the Antioch thing, now we're going to go into the issue of foods. You following the logic here? There is a certain weird logic here. You said, oh, you're reading too much into it. Am I? You decide. You be the citizen. Oh, my. Wasting. Why did the disciples transgress the traditions of the elders? And seeing that some of the disciples ate the bread with defiled, that is, unwashed hands. For the Pharisees and all the Jews, it's as if the Pharisees were different than the Jews. I don't think these are the real Pharisees. As I said, these are the Pharisees in early Christianity. The James party are designated Pharisees by Acts. Diligently eat their hands, diligently eat, not holding the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, except that they wash them, they will not eat. And many other things. So this is a Gentile looking on the way Jews behave. Ooh, aren't Jews weird? They wash their hands before they eat. These weird Jews. This is Greco-Romans writing this. This is not Palestinian. This is Paul leading new Christians. And they not even be new Christians. You have to. That's why you have to get to the sense of. I mean, no Jew would write like this. Oh, look at how weird the Jews are. But now we know Jews are not weird. Now everybody washes their hands before eating. And you know what this episode is going to have Jesus say? Don't bother washing your hands before eating. Come on, come on. You think I'm going to swallow that? You think I'm going to tell you that the historical Jesus told people not to wash their hands before eating? No, I'll tell you who told people not to wash their hands before eating. Greco-Romans who didn't like Palestinian customs. So, we're in tough ground here. You got to see what I'm talking about. I apologize if I hurt any of your feelings. But how tough this is. You know, you say this to any of your parishioners, they're going to beat the living daylights out of you. They're going to chuck you out of the door. Don't just come up with these things. Be careful if you discuss any of these things. You don't have to agree with me, but even if you raise the issues, you see how my name is abused on the internet. You see what the kind of stuff people sling at me, from everything that, eating frogs to God knows what, you start on these subjects that are precious to people, and you're in serious trouble. You should be circumspect, even if you don't even agree with me, just to talk about these things. People are very difficult on issues of this kind, of what they've been brought up and what they believe. So you question something, or you try to bring in some, measured sanity or even-handedness, you have to do so in a very gentle, circumspect way. Otherwise, I don't want you to be hurt, and I don't want you to live an unpleasant life either. I don't mind living an unpleasant life. I rather like it. So you don't have to worry about me. Even if they lop my head off and then I don't really care, because me. The fun of it was worth it. So, and I'm not doing it for fun, but just like that. I'm one of the people in the classes. I got a dead bird the other day that fell out of the tree, and I'm sure one of the boat owners shot this heron. And I got one of the guys to put it in the freezer down there, and we've taken it now to the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles to see what happened to this bird. A beautiful night heron, totally healthy bird. And the young lady, the Afro-American woman in one of my other classes in the Zionism class, she was frightened to death, wasn't she? She came down to me last night. She was petrified. We put it out in a little bag. It was all frozen solid. It couldn't have weighed more than a pound and a half, but she was petrified. But yeah, that's fun. Maybe nothing happened to the bird. We'll see.
That's nice of her to do that.
Huh?
You said that's nice of her to do that.
Yeah, it was nice of her. You wouldn't do it. No. Yeah, you would. Okay. She's done. She's taking it. She's taking it. Okay, and when they come to the markets, they will not eat. See how peculiar these Jews are? Look, again, I tell you, Pseudo-Clementines say, be like good money changers, able to change false coin from true. I want to get through this. Okay, so the traditions of the fathers is actually a tractate in the Talmud, the Pirkei Avot. The traditions of the elders, the Pirkei Avot. It's in the Talmud. So the author here knows this tractate. It has nothing to do with painting hands or anything like that. But Jesus is going to play off this in his dialectic, or in his I think it's dialectic. He's going to use that. But you say, whoever shall say to you, Father, you see, for God said. See here, let's go back to Matthew 4. Why do you transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? Because he's saying this is only a tradition of the fathers. This is not a part of the law. I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the Mosaic law. It's not in the tradition of the fathers. For God said, honor your father and mother. Here's the lawyer argument. Here's lawyer Paul. Here's lawyer overseas Gentile communities. And here's how we're going to undermine this thing, like Cheney would do, or who's the advisor to Bush, that blonde guy? What? That blonde guy, what's his name, who's Bush's strategist, who they portray him as the evil demon? Huh?
Karl Rove.
Yeah, Karl Rove. This is what Karl Rove would do. Throw this one out. Get them, so this is what's happening here. But look, you see, you know the commandment, honor your father and mother. And he that speaketh evil of his father and mother, they should be put to death. Well, that's a bit extreme. Whosoever shall say to his father and his mother, I don't think Jesus said any of these things, I hate to tell you that. Therewith thou mightest have been profited, for by me is given to God. He shall not honor, this is all to my mind dissimulation, but you decide for yourself. And he shall not honor his father, you see. What's the problem here? Your fathers didn't wash their hands. So when you're saying these hard things about wash your hands, you're dishonoring your father and mother, Jesus said. That's really what's behind this. And now the average parishioner would not be able to grasp that. That is a subliminal text here. And you have made void the word of God because of your tradition. You see, your traditions are rubbish. The tradition is honor your father and mother. You've spoken ill of your father and mother. Therefore, your traditions are invalid. That's what's being said here. But that's nothing to do with the issue. That's tendentious argumentation. The issue is, should you have clean hands before you eat? Hypocrites! Why did Isaiah prophesy this? His people honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship, teaching his doctrines. The precepts, these are only precepts of men, is what Jesus is going to say here. Mark, it goes, and he called to the multitude and said, hear and understand. In the Damascus document, you have the same thing. Listen and unstop your ears. This is almost the second column, the first, second column of Damascus document. And here again, it comes out with, not that entereth the mouth defileth the man, but that which proceedeth from the mouth defileth the man. In other words, food does not defile the man. Oh, okay, I'm happy about that. I like to eat all food. And everyone overseas, and I'm sure the Eskimos did, and the Bushmen do. Then came the disciples and said unto him, knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended when they heard the saying? Who were the Pharisees here? The Pharisees, the James party. The James party within the movement. The disciples come, look, the James party don't like what you're talking when you say these things. Jesus, Paul here. But he answered, every plant, this is beautiful, which my heavenly Father, I have a whole chapter with this title, has not planted, shall be uprooted. See why I love all these passages, that you can open them up. Shall be uprooted. Let them alone. They are blind guides. It's all in the Damascus document. The guide is the teacher in the Damascus document. The plant is in the Damascus document. And he caused a root of planting to grow, to inherit the earth and be fruitful. The root of planting is the Qumran community. And here Jesus knows that passage, because he even used the language. Every plant, and the implication is that root of planting is not from God. You see, he said God caused the root of planting to grow. How many are familiar with column 1 of the Damascus document? How many remember that passage? You must remember. Who took Dead Sea Scrolls? Well, I'm going to get you guys, column 1 of the Damascus document. He caused a root of planting to grow out of Aaron and Israel, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll keep you a little bit, just forgive me here. I'm getting all worked up here. These are my favorite passages. This is why I love this stuff. And I love doing the things I've been able to do through the grace of your teacher, here's the way the Damascus document from Cairo. Hear now, there it is, here. All you who are knowers of righteousness and consider the works of God, the Maaseh. He who has a dispute with all flesh and will condemn all those who despise or reject him. And because when you were unfaithful, the faith thing, he forsook you and hid his face from Israel and his temple and delivered them up to the sword, just like Judas Iscariot is supposed to deliver up Jesus. That was the first exile. But remembering the covenant of the forefathers, the first, he left a remnant. Here the first are not to be last. The first are first and the last are last. He left a remnant to Israel and did not deliver them up to be destroyed. And in the age of wrath, 390 years after he had given them over to the hand of the king Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, people in the past are identified, people in the present are not. He visited them. A visitation occurred from God. And he caused a root of planting to spring from Aaron and Israel to inherit his land and prosper on the good things thereof. And they perceived that they were guilty and wicked and recognized that they were sinful. This is remission of sins in the wilderness. Yet for 20 years they groped like blind men. There's the blind men that were going to now come up here in this passage. They were, blind guides. I can go word for word here. And he caused them to wander astray in a pathless wilderness, blah, 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 blah. And finally in column 2, and I'll just finish it, and just bear with me a little bit more here. Let's see. Where's column 2? Come on, where are you? Anger, God, and Roberts, and now all you went to the covenant, I will unstop your ears concerning the ways of the wicked. So we have unstopping the ears. And we also have, opening the eyes, etc. Let's just finish this and I'll let you go. And let them alone, they are blind guides. And if they're blind, lead the blind, so they all fall into the pit. Later in the Damascus document speaks about the pit. And Peter answered him and said to him, declare unto us a parable. And he says, even yet you are without understanding. Don't you perceive whatever goes into the mouth goes out the belly and down the and cast out down the toilet drain? But the thing which proceeds from the mouth, this is very nice, nothing wrong with this, they defile the man. For the heart came forth evil thoughts, fornication. And then he concludes, line 20, these are the things which defile the man. But to eat with unwashed hands defile not the man. And then in Mark, it goes line 19, go into his belly and out the toilet bowl. This he said, making all food clean. So I started all this up with the fact that Peter has questions on dietary regulations, keeping table fellowships with Gentiles. Here Jesus is portrayed as regulating that issue. But in doing so, there's a lot of other things going on. So we'll pick up the next time. Sorry to keep. This is great stuff here, great stuff. But it's fun to go through it. I hope you enjoy it and have as much fun as I do. I bet Ron couldn't have done that one now.